Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Biva Broadcasts. On this exciting episode, I am joined by Dr. Timothy Shade, Director of Bands at Wichita State University and conducting faculty at the Brass Institutes of Virginia, as well as Dr. Thomas Keck, Director of Bands at Utah Valley University. Tim and Tom have an open discussion on what the modern conductor is today, and also what it might look like tomorrow. Hope you enjoy. Episode 8 of the Biva Broadcasts. This is entitled The Modern Conductor. I am Dakota Corbliss, the Director of Operations for the Brass Institutes of Virginia. And with us, we have Dr. Timothy Shade, who is the Director of Bands at Wichita State University in Kansas, and Dr. Tom Keck, who is the Director of Bands at UVU, Utah Valley University in Utah. Welcome, guys.
Hello, hello.
Thank you.
So today we're going to go through a variety of questions talking about conducting in today's world, what the modern conductor really is. But first off, I was just wondering if you guys could kind of give your background on where you started as a musician, how you became conductors, and how you got to your positions today. So maybe, Tim, if we could start with you.
Sure. When I was coming up as a youngin' and an instrumentalist, all I wanted to do was basically be the greatest euphonium player on the planet. And everybody laughs, as they should, because what does that even mean? I mean, what are euphonium players? And so, you know, I had a jazz trombone also was sort of put together. And so, I mean, performance was really the way I was going. I got my undergrad degree in performance, sort of a euphonium and jazz trombone tandem there. And then while I was an undergrad, I was very curious because I had a great band director, Steve Gage, at Youngstown State University. He was very emotional and consummate musician and a beautiful conductor. And I just was like, I kind of want to do what he does. How do I get in with that? You know? And so I approached Dr. Gage and said, if I wanted to be a conductor, what should I do? And he goes, well, Tim, the first thing you should do is become the drum major of the marching band. And then the second thing you should do is this summer, study Beethoven symphonies. Start with the odd ones. So go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then do the evens. And if you make it all the way through, we'll talk in the fall. Yet again, I'm a euphonium player. I was a freshman. I didn't know anything about Beethoven at that point. So I go and grab the Dover scores, and I was lucky enough to be on a cruise ship that summer playing as a trombonist, and I literally studied as much of those scores as I could, getting lost all over the place, couldn't hang. And so that was sort of the start. I was drum major in the fall of my sophomore year. And so I love to tell people my first time conducting was for an audience of 10,000 people. And it probably is still the largest audience I've
I was going to say, yeah, have you ever conducted with more than that?
No, it's not.
A lot more, but maybe not 10,000.
At our really cool college band director conventions, we don't get that many people in the audience. So that was sort of the start of it. And I continued with small ensembles, putting them together in undergrad. And then told Dr. Gage I wanted to pursue a master's degree in conducting, thinking that my trajectory was going to be towards being a studio professor that possibly could teach chamber music ensemble. That was sort of where I was thinking. Was introduced to my guru at this point, or mentor, Gary Green, at Midwest after my senior year. And Green agreed to have me come and be an assistant, to get an assistantship, at the University of Miami for my master's. Those 2 years were unbelievably eye-opening, learned a lot more. I still played that entire time. It was a master's degree in performance, actually. Euphonium performance with a conducting cognate, kind of. I tell people I got a double master's because it was the same coursework plus 2 recitals. Then I got really lucky, and I got a job at a small private liberal arts college out here in Kansas called Bethel College. And that was remarkable because it was like I had to teach band and orchestra. I was teaching studio class, and I also had to help with some music ed stuff. So talk about just being thrown into the deep end. You know, I didn't have all the education background that a lot of my colleagues had getting an ed degree. And so it was like, here we go. You either sink or swim, baby. And plus orchestra. I hadn't really done much with orchestra. Yet again, euphonium player. And so that was unbelievably, I said the master's degree was eye-opening. Teaching at Bethel College was like earth-shattering. I mean, it was unbelievable. The best first job I could have imagined. Those people were great. And the students were just so smart. They were so much smarter than I was. And so I had to hustle to stay up and be able to actually teach them something. Then I was there for 5 years, and I got a little hungry for more. I figured I wanted to try and continue to learn, and I convinced Green to take me as his last student. He came out to Kansas 3 or 4 times while I was here. Believe it or not, it was weird. He was out here for an all-state, and it was for a professional band. And so we were having a discussion, and I said, man, I'm looking for DMA. Where do I need to go? And he goes, well, you're not coming to study with me. I said, well, we'll see about that. And so I happened to convince him to take me, and he retired actually while I was there doing my doctorate. And Rob Carnahan from the University of Texas got the job. And so that was a wonderful connection to make. And I think from my connections out here in Kansas, the director of band position at Wichita State opened up. And I got a phone call because they needed to do an emergency hire. And I was lucky enough to have that opportunity. And the rest is kind of history. I don't know how I convinced them to hire me permanently, but here I am as director of bands. And so it's very interesting that, like I said, all I wanted to do was be the greatest euphonium player on the planet. And now I'm directing bands, and I'm leading and hopefully mentoring in a positive way all of these wonderful students. So it's really odd, but it's pretty cool.
That is awesome. Yeah, I can definitely speak on behalf of your work with us and whatnot, that you've been a great addition to the team. And
thanks, man.
yeah, of course. And I think that especially coming from a background where you wanted to be the the best euphonium player on the planet, especially in our sense when you come work at the Brass Institutes, like having that background as a brass musician certainly makes it more relatable. And then on top of that, you make sure that everybody feels like they're contributing. So
Right.
euphonium players, they have to work hard to contribute a lot of the time.
That's right. Don't have much to.
So I guess you're coming from the background where you can relate. So yeah, Tom, if you could give us a little bit of your background, I think that would really, I'm sure, a contrast with Tim. So
yeah, sure.
Player,
One of the interesting things that I would start with, and I don't mean to say back in 3rd grade when I won the spelling bee, but my origin even comes from that notion of being nervous, would I make it as a musician and as a teacher, from the suburban background, and I thought my parents were putting pressure on me to not major in music, but they weren't. It was really my own issue, but I know that a fair number of folks that are listening might have gone through this battle or might be wondering anyway. So I actually spent 2 years as an accounting major as an undergrad first, and was playing in the ensembles as a non-major. And that's what made me organically realize that I needed music to be more in my life than just a hobby. And at first I thought, I'll be an accountant. I'll teach the local high school drumline, which, by the way, on a tangent, I'm thrilled to be involved with the Brass Institute of Virginia. I might as well just let the secret out early on that I'm a percussionist.
Thanks for the plug. Much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think euphonium players struggle in a brass seminar, thanks for inviting the percussionist. But in any event, but I do have that same similarity with Tim, that through high school and through college, all the way, performing was what I really enjoyed doing. And that was what brought me back into it as a major and as a career, was I just needed to make the music. So that coming to that has been really good for me, because I've never had to second guess ever since. And I went all the way through school, and my doctorate is a cognate in percussion performance. My master's, I met the requirements actually for all 3 degrees: music ed, percussion performance, and conducting. So yeah, that's going to be a running thread through our conversation, is how it's come from the world of being performers and making music that way, evolving or devolving, depending on your perspective, into the role of a conductor. But yeah, I've had a great success with just leveraging opportunities. I was way into the marching band, drumline, drum corps stuff as an undergrad. And so that gave me opportunities to write drill and write parts, which got me into grad school, which got me a first job, and then one door after the next. And I would say that part of my life, it might be fascinating to some people, is as I've progressed through it, I've moved further away from the marching band side of life. Not that I disrespect it, I love it, and now I have a great time just sort of being an uncle with it and visiting and helping out. And then, okay, great, it looks like it's going to rain, I'm leaving. So I still strongly value those activities, but through every step, every career path in my trajectory, it's gone more into deeper music and more into symphonic concert repertoire and further away from the athletic side. But everything about that is what got me to where I am today, and I'm very thankful for it. So that's kind of an overview of what's happened in my career.
Gotcha. Two very different paths, but you guys are both at some of the best universities in the country, doing wind band studies and stuff like that. So that's really cool that to see that somebody that might not necessarily have the same background as you can come from something that's just as random, from an accounting major or something like that, or being a euphonium player and conducting wind band. And Tim, we'll talk a little bit later about your time conducting orchestras in Miami while you were there too.
Yep.
So we've titled this session "The Modern Conductor," and by we I mean Tim has. So because I'm definitely not a modern conductor, I just play the French horn. But I was wondering if you could go a little more into that, on why you came to that, that kind of overarching view of what we're going to talk about today a little bit more, Tim.
Sure. So for me, at least when I was coming up, the concept of being a conductor was either you're a Leonard Bernstein type and somehow you find a way to be a professional conductor with an orchestra, or you're a band director. I mean, that was it. And I think through, just from what Tom and I have kind of just talked about, there's so many different paths there. And then now, even when I started my job here at Wichita State 5 years ago to what it is now is completely different. Mm-hmm. So I think that with the evolution of sort of our music world now, conductors are coming out of the woodwork. And I don't mean people that wave pretty. I mean people that lead ensembles, and how we need to think about how what we program affects how we're perceived by our audience. What else do we need to do as far as societal norms? Do we need to think? It's a big talk right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. But there are pieces that are in the core of our repertoire that we might not play anymore because of what signal that thing is. And so the modern conductor is important because I don't think that a conductor is going to be successful anymore just knowing one repertoire or just having one trick in their bag, if you will, or that they're able to do. And so for me, I think the modern conductor is almost an amalgam of all of these experiences that they can grab onto. And I think that becomes very important. If we just think about the repertoire in the wind band world, it has evolved immensely, even just in the past 20 or 30 years, from being a standard instrumentation to much more chamber-based. It's a lot more influenced by pop music, rock, jazz. Of course, atonal or free-form music is big. And so you can't just say, well, I want to conduct Holston Granger for my career, and that's what I want to do. There's a lot to that, and that's phenomenal music, and I stand by it. But if you don't know more than that, I don't think that you're quite up to speed with what we have to do these days. I think that, we'll talk probably a little bit about the fact that both Tom and I do a lot more than just direct bands. And I think that actually affects what we bring to the podium or what we bring to the classroom for our students. And so it's a long-winded answer, and I apologize for that, because it's a complex thought. The modern conductor is not someone that walks into a rehearsal and conducts for 45 minutes of music that they pick and then they go home. That's not what we do. It's much more involved than that. And I think I want to demystify it a little bit too. I think there's this thing that if I want to be a conductor or I want to be an ensemble leader, and I actually like that term better than conductor, I have to be a little snooty, and I have to know more than everybody, and I have to be better than everybody. I don't know that that's necessarily true either. I think it's just being a sponge and wanting to give back as much as you can and being hungry to learn. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this. And I brought one of my best friends here. Tom Keck was one of my mentors at Miami during my doctorate, and that's part of it. And he and I have stayed close, and you should hear some of the conversations that we talk about. We call and say, hey, have you heard of this piece? What other, it's just not always that way. You usually get into your little silo and do your business. But no, it's becoming a much more larger network of discussion, and I think that's important.
Gotcha. You kind of touched on that being a director of bands doesn't necessarily mean that you just walk into rehearsal and stand on the podium and whatnot. But I was wondering if both of you could talk about some of the other responsibilities that come with that. A wind ensemble just doesn't put on 4 concerts a year. That's not all they do. They go places, they make sure they go to conferences and are recruiting for the next wave of students that come in, so on and so forth, and they do outreach and I could go on and on, but you guys would obviously know more about what you do. Maybe Tom, if you could start with what your responsibilities might include at UVU.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I do want to tag on 1 or 2 quick thoughts on
sure.
the modern conductor thing. Sorry very much, Dakota. When I think the word modern sometimes can imply, well, right now, today, or the last 5 years. And I know Tim would agree with me that when we say the modern conductor, we really are even including folks that are still in the profession near their retirement. Some of them, Bob Reynolds is arguably the person that's led us into this movement, and he's in his 70s. But when I think about the modern conductor role, it's this generation against, so what you would say, from the conductors of the 40s and the 50s that were these sort of great abuses of players, and the way that the conductor was the all-knowing one, just like Tim was talking about, this whole idea of being a sponge. And to me, that's what I really look forward to in rehearsals in this era, and people like Gary Green that we talk about and other mentor conductors, that the rehearsal becomes a lot more of a collaboration, and it becomes way more engaging for all the performers. Even now, I'll still play in semi-professional or community type groups from time to time, just to remind myself what it's like to not be on the podium. And it's really important to remember how I enjoy when the conductor asks a question or has a good open dialogue back and forth with the players. And when I feel like my input is really valued from the conductor, that they just haven't already decided what it is, and that's that. So I think that's a major thread that I wanted to mention for following up on Tim, is that notion of being the sponge and bringing a community into the room, whereas that wasn't the case before. It used to be, if you weren't ready or you disagreed, you were gone and you were never getting called again. And now we're really kind of embracing the idea of everyone, well, what have you got? Contribute something to the discussion. Don't just sit there passively and be part of this ensemble, but contribute. And so those are some of the things that I admire in Tim's conducting and teaching too. He's just at the center of that. He'll go right to a player and ask the question, what do you think? Why should we do this? Why did you shape that line that way? And it causes the player to think about what they were doing. So those are some of the good conversations we have that way. Back to the question you were asking.
No, please.
Yeah. Well,
that was great.
I'll say this, and I promise I'm not going to dwell too long on the marching band time, but one of the things I've learned when I've been able to step away from that is that the time that you don't have for writing drill and writing arrangements and getting buses and all that stuff is the time that you're really using to study your scores and to learn your music and to get as deep as you can. There is a fact of life that there's only 24 hours in a day, and arguably we're supposed to sleep once in a while. So when
overrated.
Yeah, and I know Dakota's right in the middle of this mindset too, Tim, myself. When we're young, it's like, yeah, I can do everything. I'm going to conquer the world, and that's how the game is played. And you need to do that. You need to be open for every opportunity. But as time goes by and you start realizing, no, I need to say no to things so that I can go deep on certain topics. That's been an important recognition in my life. And so since moving into strictly concert conducting and away from the athletic bands, it's really given me the time to dive as deeply as I can into music to make informed decisions so that my rehearsals are that much better. That I think is, the main thing that I would say. What do we do aside from put on concerts is you come prepared for it as best you can. And the notion that we're going to stand on the podium and expect the players to show up with their part learned, that needs to be a given, that everybody in the room has their part performance ready, including the conductor, and you're able to add intelligent information onto that on top of the given notes on the page. But beyond that, I mean, I'm sure a handful of the administrative type things that we do. I mean, depending on who's helping you out with things, you might be writing your own program notes. You might be actually taking your own attendance and details at rehearsals. I mean, nobody walks in front of a professional ensemble and does that. So managing of whatever your learning system might be and transferring that over beyond the wind band, coming up with your actual repertoire. And I know we'll talk about that in depthly. What do you believe in? What are you going to program? How are you going to organize it into a concert? But beyond that, you might have anything else on the load from actually teaching conducting, which can be very intimidating the first time if you've never really considered, well, how did I do this? There's a lot of other components that come into it. So I've rambled on that. I'll let Tim kind of give some clearer thoughts on specifics beyond the ensemble.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm finding that I think that for me especially, it's been interesting. I've never set out to be an arranger by any stretch, and that's become a big part of my life. Just knowing finale, that's what I use, Sibelius or Dorico or other programs, but it's surprising now how much arranging I'm doing, not just for Viva, for instance, but like there's a local church that I'm writing horn parts for. With what's about to happen this fall with the pandemic, a lot of rearranging I'm probably going to be doing. So like that has really been unbelievably helpful to me too. Like if you're curious about it, just go after it. It's helped me study scores better. My transposition went through the roof quickly. I mean, as you know, we don't all play in C. So I mean, it's
playing
been,
all of them.
yeah,
Not Dakota.
I mean, so that's one of the biggest things that actually has picked up for me. The idea of being a multi-genre instrumentalist too has been important for me. I tried as hard as I can to stretch it out. So I still play a lot of trombone. I don't play very much euphonium, as we were joking about. There's not a lot of places to play. So that's kind of nice. We haven't talked about it yet, but I'm also the associate director at Wichita State School of Music. And I think, Tom, aren't you the chair of the Department of Music?
Yeah, I missed a meeting, so I got stuck with an administrative job.
So it's funny. I mean, just thinking about all of the administrative things we do aside from running ensembles, like recruiting we were talking about, and just setting your chairs and stands, setting your repertoire, arranging, and then being a group administrator. I mean, it's a lot, and I think it makes you more well-rounded. You know, that's what I found. I have a different level of sympathy and empathy, in all honesty, having been an administrator for a little while now. So there's a lot more probably that's not coming to mind, but it's a lot.
It's like how much of that can you list that's not in the job description, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I was taking off of that thread too, because there's so much of this stuff that's not the joy of being on the podium and making music with fellow musicians. That's where it is. You need to love that, and you need to know it going into it, because as your career evolves, that time is actually likely going to be less and less. Right. So that needs to be at your core of your spirit and of what you believe in, that you're looking forward to that as the thing, because there's going to be plenty of TPS reports and assessments and all that stuff coming along. That's not what you signed up for.
Yeah. This might have changed in the past. Let's see, we're in July, so the past 4 months, maybe this answer has changed. But what would you guys say to someone who maybe is just starting their undergrad, or maybe is coming out of high school, and knows that they want to be involved with music, and they're thinking about maybe being a conductor or director of bands, either at the high school or collegiate level or something like that, or at the professional level, you know, with an orchestra or something along those lines? I know that advice might have changed over the current situations, but Tom, maybe if you can give some insight on what you would say to somebody who says, I want to be a conductor, what do I have to do?
Yeah. Interestingly, my response would be, you're the lucky ones, and I would say now's the best time ever to go into it, because actually there probably will be some people that leave in the immediate future right now. And if I was coming into school, I think by the time we're past this, hopefully within a year or so, but certainly by 4 years, or even 2 or 3 if you're a grad student by now, I think the jobs are going to be there, and you're going to be at the front end of a good time. So like they say in the financial world, scared money doesn't make money. Same thing here. If you're nervous because of COVID, you're ahead of it. You'll be fine. Go into it and do it. So yeah, that's a strong piece of advice that I have. And whereas I don't know if Utah and Kansas are competing for students out there, Tim, feel free to take that line, because I think now's a great time to go into music in any discipline. Absolutely. What would I recommend someone to do? Become the absolute best musician you can. And that, it took me a while to learn too. Like I said, I was into the idea of breadth over depth for a while, and I was doing a little bit of everything because I thought that was important, and it was. But ultimately, I'm convinced that depth wins out. So if you're not sure what to do, become the best musician that you can on your instrument. So I said, I'm a percussionist. What do I tell a euphonium player? Well, I think about how I would shape the line on a marimba, and then that's the information that I give them. So my musicianship guides me to information for Tim, and he doesn't need to be insulted by me with fingerings and such like that. He just wants the idea of, what line are you looking for? What's the architecture here of this segment, Tom? So become the best musician you can. If for some reason you actually find a few spare minutes of time in your life, make piano the next thing that you do. Become a functioning piano player. That pays off in spades as a conductor and as a musician overall. But where we need to understand the way that harmony moves and at least be able to chunk it out at quarter note equals once an hour, I think that's important to have some competent piano skills. So those would be my initial statements. And Tim, feel free.
Yeah, I actually really agree. I have for undergrads, the best line that Gary Green ever said to me is and I'm going to screw it up, so hopefully he doesn't watch this. It's something along the lines that the only way you know how to teach is what you know how to do yourself. So that in-depth study of your instrument will come out inevitably when you go to lead other musicians, which is exactly what Tom was saying. And so for undergrads especially, I try and tell them the same thing. If you come to me and you want to be a conductor, it's go play your instrument or sing or whatever your voice that you express your musicianship on, to the best of your ability, and dive as deep as possible. A lot of students come to me worried about choreography. And of course, when I'm talking about choreography, I'm talking about patterns. That will come. I usually try, I very rarely have had a freshman come to me and say, hey, I want to be a conductor. Let's go right now. But I do try and get that involved as soon as possible, even just sort of getting a basic understanding for how this works. Because with my master's students that have only had, we only have about 2 conducting classes that we take as music majors. So when my master's students are coming, they're far behind when it comes to choreography, but they know that going in. So that's the only other thing. For the master's students or for upperclassmen undergrads, and you're really thinking about being a conductor, my biggest piece of advice as far as what you should be doing is listening to any and all musics that you can. You have to just envelop, and I don't mean be able to drop a needle test and understand what you're listening to. That's not what I'm talking about. But the more music you listen to, the more you learn to phrase your own opinion about things. So you've heard probably orchestral musicians say, well, if you're going to go take an audition and you're going to have to play the opening to Mahler 5 on the trumpet, you're not going to listen to one recording of it. You're going to listen to 100 recordings of it. Well, why is that? It's so that way you gain different likes and dislikes from what people have done, what great players have done. It's the same thing. If we're going to have to choose repertoire, the only way that I can make a value judgment, or even more than that, maybe a moral or a spiritual judgment on what is good or bad, is by really having an in-depth understanding of everything that's out there. And that means listening to a lot of music that maybe we don't like. And I think that's important. Olivier Messiaen is one composer that I don't really understand. And when I first listened to Oiseau Exotique, which is a piece for winds and solo piano, I hated it. And in all honesty, I hated the Stravinsky piano concerto too. I just happened to pick 2 piano concertos that popped in my head. But the more I learned about them and the more I listened to other musics, I was able to hear the influences that those composers had from their peers. And so that one's big for me. My master's students often leave, and a couple of undergrads saying, yeah, I'm so thankful that you made us listen to just hundreds of tunes. And I think that is so underrated, but it's so easy to do today with all of the different platforms. I mean, there's no excuse to not know a million tunes. Really, just to say, oh, I've listened to that, I'll go listen to it again. And so that's the biggest one for me. We'll take care, teachers like Tom and me, we'll take care of all this stuff and how to rehearse and all that kind of thing, but your knowledge of your musicianship and tunes, that's on you. So that's basically my big, those are my two big things.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree stronger. I'm so glad you went down that road about the listening aspect. One thing I've actually added into that for advice for folks in the last year or two was when you're listening to it, try to come up with a specific comment of what you think and what would you say if you're an aspiring conductor. I really like this aspect of the phrasing. I really notice we have a time problem here, whatever the case might be. But it doesn't even it's not even criticism. It can be, wow, I was captivated by the sonority of the ensemble or the tone quality from the soloist. So you're listening, but you're also coming up with the beginnings of a vocabulary of what you might say as a conductor down the line. So by listening to this version of Mahler 5, Bud Herseth, I specifically like the way he went after the third note, whatever the case might be. So, yeah, thanks, Tim. That was great.
Tim, you talked a little bit about how undergrads generally get a semester or two of conducting, and I'd like to think I was somewhat decent. Travis Cross, if you're watching right now, please don't comment poorly on my conducting. But one thing that I always found is that I think that sometimes at a very elementary level, we have a hard time just having enough tools in the toolbox to be able to influence, what we might want a musical line to do.
Sure.
And I'm sure as educators, you guys have, perfected that balance of physical movement versus kind of verbal instruction. And if you can kind of explain, where that, that perfect balance is, and maybe like how many times do you try to show that before realizing that maybe that isn't the best way to go about it, or so on and so forth.
Right.
Maybe I'll start off with that one.
Sure.
To me, it's likely a continuum across the player's career. So I still want beginning band teachers and conductors to be as artful as they can, but there's a recognition there that the student doesn't understand what those patterns and what those gestures mean, that this means please get louder, please softer. So there may be more talking with a younger group while you're indoctrinating them into the motion and into what it means. But the goal is always, of course, no talking, and it's all done through the physical motion. And so likewise, if I get the opportunity to stand in front of the New York Philharmonic, I'd better have something really important to say to them with my mouth that I wasn't able to show with my hands. So I think we want to consider where you are along that continuum for everybody. Dakota, you mentioned a great comment there about how often do you repeat something before you actually talk. That's a great mindset to have. Is okay. You know what? I've decided how I'm going to show this phrase. Okay, darn, that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to go to choice B without saying anything. I'm going to try something different. Okay, that worked. Then I think you're at a question point where you have to ask, do I want to go to choice C, or at what point have we gone too far? And no, I'm going to stop and I'm going to say it. So I will always have a choice B in my pocket, and I will usually have a choice C as well. Then after that, then I'm going to start thinking, okay, Tom, maybe this is on you. Maybe the players aren't able to figure it out by now. You need to go home and come up with a D, E, F, G. But that's where my head is. I tend to hope that A works, ready for B, and then in my head I'm talking about maybe we need to discuss this with the group.
Yeah, a quick plug for Travis Cross, by the way. He was the keynote speaker at TMEA this past year, and some great sessions. So if anybody's watching and you don't know who Travis Cross is, go check him out. He's in UCLA, right?
UCLA, yep.
And then he gave 3 or 4 talks at TMEA that were just stellar. So sorry, I was just thinking about that as you forgot about that. Yeah, so this is an interesting one for me, and you notice I kind of was like making faces as you were asking the question. Ideally, right, and Tom sort of mentioned it, we want to be able to show everything. We want to be able to not say anything. I think we want to. This is, in massive, the largest air quotes you could ever possibly imagine. Because we've all, I think all of us that are practicing musicians have griped at one point or another about sitting in a rehearsal and going, oh, they're still talking. Why are they talking? They could have done this differently. And so that was like the biggest hurdle for me as a young conductor, because it's so much easier to go, well, that sucked. Hey, let me tell you how to do this. And then you can look terrible and it doesn't matter. So, I tell my students, if there was a ratio, you want 70 to 80% conducting, 20% talking. And ideally, we want it even higher. Now, that I pulled that number out of the air. That's not like in a book somewhere that we can go find. The concept is be able to show it way more than stop and talk about it. And actually, I use almost exactly what Tom's talking about. I try something. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, hold up. Let's try that again. And I'll do something different. Well, that didn't work either. I got maybe one more try before the students or the ensemble is going to get frustrated going, what do you want us to do? You've got to give us some feedback. And so I think that feedback loop is something that we haven't touched on either that I should. But I mean, at about time 2 or 3, if physically it's not working, either your vocabulary, which is typically the case, us as waivers, we're not showing something that's clear, or they don't understand how to play it yet. So something needs to be given to them to help make them play better. One of the things that, and actually along that point, that's important to me. I've yet to stand in front of an ensemble that doesn't want to sound good. And so for me, that's like really important. Am I getting in the way of them sounding good? Am I getting in the way of them being able to express themselves by talking at them too much? Or am I giving them leeway to be individuals in the larger unit? So that feedback loop that I mentioned a second ago is really important. I will often give compliments, heaven forbid. Many conductors don't like to do that, right? I mean, so we get to the end of a phrase and I don't have anything to say, and I'll go, good, okay, next. It's just kind of move on. And I think that's important too. But the player is constantly watching. If you do something or you address something in rehearsal, or you even address something that's large, the player is then going to check in and say, did I do what the conductor wanted? And so it's important that feedback loop is constantly happening. There are phenomenal graphs or charts, I'm not sure, illustrations, sorry, that's a better word, of how you should think about this as a teacher. You give information, they need to synthesize that information, so you've got to give them a shot to do it, and then they give you information back, and then you need to make a decision. So as a conductor especially, but I still think we're more teachers maybe than a conductor per se, these become almost as important as anything else, is listening to what your players or the players that are in front of you are giving you, and then deciding what they need back from you. I can think of some discipline moments, and I use that word loosely, but where the ensemble's not playing very well. And so what's the answer? Is the answer to chastise them and let them have it, or do we just stop and try again? And the atmosphere in the room can shift immensely. And I think that's something that young conductors don't have a handle on, and me sort of still being young, I like to think so at least. That impatient, that impetuous, I've got to get this right now, can get in the way. And so the verbal versus the playing can really kind of, but I tell my students all the time, you've been playing your instrument probably for 9 or 10 years, you've been waving your hands for about 2. So This is a little behind. It'll take time. It'll just take time.
And one similar thread to what Tim was just saying, I think to go towards anybody in the practice room as well too, is just thinking, all right, this time I'm stopping. Do I actually need to tell them what they did wrong, or do they have it and they just need to do it again? And so oftentimes it takes some new folks with me a little while to get used to. A lot of times I'll stop and just say do it again without really giving an answer. That can be frustrating, but if I have a strong perception that they're gonna figure it out and they just need the repetition, then don't talk about it. But when you say something, have something to say. That's the important thing. But also, like Tim's saying, since you've just been doing it so short, that's what experience is. So don't feel bad about it. I used to explain everything. I don't do it as much anymore because I now trust that the players actually know what to do. Tom, you don't have to say everything. Sorry, Tim.
That's actually something I wanted to bring up. So maintain that connection. If you're going to be a conductor, maintain that connection to being a player. I think that's a big deal. Keep your player hat on while you have a baton in your hand or on the podium. Because, I never played a perfect rehearsal as a euphonium player at trombones. We miss notes, right? So if the conductor were to stop and address every single wrong note I made, aside from giving me the benefit of the doubt, we'd never get any. So thinking about, okay, that was just a fluke. Let's let that one go. That's also really important. So it's the same idea of trusting the players to take care of it. We're really in the weeds now, but that's okay. Like, this is sort of to the core of rehearsal technique. Don't feel like you have to fix everything. But yeah, trust the players.
Are we in the weeds? Are we in the tulips?
I'm in the tulips, right? Outside. Yeah.
There you
So, you guys both harped on making sure that you listen. You're listening to music all the time, and you're always ingesting this new repertoire, whether that's new literally in terms of time or new to you, something that you weren't necessarily had delved into before. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about, I think more in the past 100 years, 50 years even than ever, wind band music is definitely getting produced a lot more. And if you guys could talk a little bit about how much new music you listen to, how important commissioning is in your job, and especially in expanding the repertoire in the music that you guys conduct primarily.
Tim? Okay, I'll do it. Yeah. The listening part is really important. And we talked about it at length for students, but so then that has to be our responsibility as well too. And we have to find more than responsibility. We have to find enjoyment out of listening to music and considering where in your professional career it'll fit, not whether, oh, this is good or bad, but, oh, when will I get the chance to do this music? Right now I'm spending time listening to music by Carolyn Shaw and listening to music by Omar Thomas and having a great time doing it. And I mean, anytime a recording comes out from Alarm Will Sound, I'm going to listen. I want to know what the music is that is being presented contemporarily. So by all means, I don't want to say constantly listening, but it's an important part of my day to make sure. When I was in doctoral school, I made it a project one year to listen to a new symphony every day. And so, believe it or not, I learned 365 symphonies, by just doing one a day. And how much time did that take? Now, did I learn them? Not like Tim with the odds and evens on the Beethovens, but I listened to them and I got familiar with them and I drew the patterns between the composers and so on and so forth. So I may challenge that to anybody that's listening right now is, of course, you might not have hours on a day for concentrated listening, although we do that sometimes, but do you have time to listen to a piece of music each day? And what if that became an Excel file or a journal or whatever that you just kept track of? It's not that difficult to make time for music if you believe in it, right? So for sure, I listen to a lot of music. Where does the role of commissioning fit? All music was new at one point or another, and that's my answer to that. So it has to keep moving forward, and particularly now to build back on what Dakota was talking about with the coronavirus time. Composers need to be writing for us, and they are. They're doing wonderful things, but we need to make sure that our art form just explodes when we can all be back together in the concert halls, and that there's music that's ready for us in any kind of genre, any kind of instrumentation. So I'm excited by it. I try to participate in as many commissions as my budget will allow, or as I think that our ensemble can handle. I mean, at the same time, that's a big challenge on players to do nothing but new music. There's something to be said for standards and something to be said for cross-genre music of any era. So, and I think we might get to this topic later on, but that's a very important recognition that we have an obligation to teach different historical periods too. So the whole thing can't be new music, but at the same time, if you're not part of new music, then we're really not what the people in the Grout history book were. Everybody was doing music at their time. And so there's a great responsibility to do music now. So those are some of my thoughts, Tim.
Yeah, Gary Green, who was kind of, yet again, like I said, my guru, was one of the largest commissioners of wind repertoire that that I'm aware of. And so he sort of indoctrinated that in me. So commissioning, especially when I got the job at Bethel, was like the most important thing to me. It was, I have to commission, I have to be in what's new and what's, I've got to create new music and provide opportunities for composers. And part of it is because the repertoire that we have is only about 130, 40 years old, really. That's the extant repertoire. There's others, but I mean, it's, a lot of it was right around the turn of the 19th century or the 1900s, excuse me, when a lot of our repertoire was written. So the 20th century, forgive me. And also right now, the diversity part of this is very interesting. My boss, who is a composer himself, Alexander Sternfeld Dunn, we were in a little faculty meeting, and he said, so what if, and I'll fund this, what if you did an entire season of all underrepresented or minority composers? What would that look like? And my initial response was, well, you're not going to tell me because I know that these pieces are great. So I want to do some of this great music. You can't, there's not good enough music that's good by these minority composers. And of course, the flip side of that, as soon as I thought about it, almost after it came out of my mouth was, I guess we need to commission some, or we need to commission some more. And that my statement that I just made isn't fair either, because there is phenomenal music out there. I just don't know it yet. And so that's a big problem that I'm struggling with personally, is I've got to go find more of this music that's off of the normal hegemonic or hegemony that we sort of listen to. And the composer diversity database has really opened. I'm not trying to plug people, but like that thing is pretty cool. And so I literally spent 2 or 3 hours last year, and it's been completely updated. And I spent 2 or 3 hours this year finding tunes by composers I've never heard of. And so it's important. Commissioning is important, I find. Listening can't be overstated how important that is, because you just have to see what's out there. So repertoire is our textbook. And so for me, it's like, I'm just constantly hungry and finding rep. My students are constantly like, how do you find this stuff? Where do you find these pieces? And it's usually from calling Tom, calling Rob Carnahan, or calling Michael Hancock at Oklahoma, calling somebody and saying, hey, what do you listen to? You find anything cool? And so that's kind of how it starts. And then you go to their website and you find stuff. So it's just being curious, really curious.
Yeah, you talked about of having somebody commission a whole season's worth of compositions and stuff like that, and this kind of ties into my next question about programming.
Yeah.
And Tom, you mentioned having to make sure, particularly I think it's really important with your music ed kids and stuff like that, just making sure that they're exposed to the standards of the repertoire and obviously cross-genre stuff as well and stuff that's newer. But could you guys talk a little bit about what goes through your head when you are programming for a season? Maybe concert by concert or over the course, if you guys are going for kind of a theme over the course of the academic year or something like that.
Yeah, you want me to go or you go?
You go ahead, please. I talk first all the time. You go.
I know, that's why I was like, I gotta talk first. I keep making it go first. For me, there's about 2 or 3 different concepts for how I go about programming. One of them is if I'm in what I would say a developmental ensemble. So I use that word on purpose. So if I were to conduct a high school youth wind ensemble. So I think about trajectory programming. So what am I aiming for by the end? So we're not going to start with the hardest stuff and then we're going to lead to this piece. I think that a lot of the students that are music ed, I talk to them about that idea. You should have goal pieces in mind. Then you're going to find what goals you want to achieve, and then what repertoire will get you there. So that's one idea. The other one, which I kind of do with the wind ensemble, is I aim for 4 distinct concerts, because that's how many I have, and I want each of those to be profound or powerful in their own way. So we're not leaving, when you get to a certain level, something similar to a professional ensemble, you don't have to worry about trajectory as much, right? They can just kind of nail this. So now you're thinking more artistically about what repertoire needs to be done. How are you balancing it on the program? Are you using soloists? Things like that. So when I do those, I usually start with a goal piece for that program or the big piece, and then kind of program around that. That is a whole large discussion that we could talk about for 15 hours or something. So we don't really want to go there, but that's one way. And then the third way that I've seen that really is beneficial is sort of thematic programming. And that's become big. And I've seen it really work with professional ensembles and school ensembles. This entire season is going to be about collaboration. And so they're going to do works that make sure that they have that sort of vibe in it or whatever. There was a Wichita Wind Ensemble with a professional band out here for a few years, and I was lucky enough to play in them. And they had a great artistic team that would constantly come up with a theme for the entire season. And so the repertoire would sneak into that. We've often seen that with movie music concerts or pops concerts, but you can have really good artistic concerts that have a theme running through them as well. So, I mean, just as a sort of a surface level, those are three different ways that I think about programming. Now, what I haven't touched on is diversity, is all of that can be weaved into those different ways. So that's sort of my 2 cents. I spend probably 3 months programming. It's that difficult for me. So it's not a quick process by any stretch.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I would tag on to what Tim was saying as well. It was to the notion of thinking of each concert in terms of where the challenges and where the musical expressive goals that I have. And so this might play into programming a recital, of course, for anyone out there listening in Brassland. I have come up with a sort of ratio formula in my head that I want about 50% of that concert to be attainable with modest to significant work. And then on each side of that, 25% of really darn challenging, and this is going to really bust you to get there, and 25% that they more or less could sight read, and it's in the pocket at the beginning so that we can go deep and go sensitive on that. But I've found that, structuring music, giving myself that framework, in addition to what Tim was saying about programming around, okay, this is the core thing that I want to have, has given me really good guidance for most of my concerts. And that idea of 25% that's really hard and 25% that's already in my back pocket helps out. And then that keeps that 50% a good challenge. And so from beginners through advanced, that's been working really well for me. And yeah, I would agree with also what Tim's saying on the programming arc. I've done some years where I've had a theme across the entire season because that is a trending topic, and I've enjoyed it. And once it was actually artistically really fruitful and meaningful, and some other times it's been just a little bit of, a marketing ploy almost. And I understand that matters too. You want to get an audience there. But then certainly each concert, has a definite storyline to it. Whether they connect throughout the season, that varies year to year.
Cool. If you guys don't mind, we got a couple questions, if that's okay, from some viewers. First from Jason. What tips do you have for leveraging a first tenure track collegiate job into shorter waits before one goes up for a tenure at a second job?
Ask the question again.
Right. Yeah, yes, hold on.
You freeze?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just trying to read this and make sure that I'm phrasing this correctly.
Sure.
I'm a musician, right? Yep. So what tips do you guys have for leveraging a first tenure track job into a shorter wait before you go up for a tenure at a second job?
Oh, that's a good question. You want?
I'll lead with it first, and I'll say I've had several jobs, and without counting them, I'm on my 4th or 5th right now. So I can tell you a little bit about going from places. And one initial statement would be, careful, the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and it is very easy. And I was right there at the beginning of my career of I'm going to climb this ladder, and I will have the Eastman Wind Ensemble by the time I'm blah, blah, blah. I understand that, and that's good. I mean, because that's a goal. So I'm not going to discourage it, but I will say there are a lot of different challenges with a lot of different places, and I'm actually extraordinarily happy in where I am right now in Utah Valley. There's an obscurity factor. I'm not at the University of Michigan, and so I don't have the resources. I don't have the doctoral students and this amazing ensemble for sure. But I have a great community of very supportive folks, and I mean, this is my concert hall. I've got a wonderful facility. A lot of the just life things are beautiful in Utah. I can ski and all these kinds of things. So I would say take that life component first. As it's not necessarily all about that. Now, that being said, though, okay, I understand what you're saying. Everybody has a first job, and so yeah, okay, that's true. Without this being too pessimistic, but trying to be real, I would say start gauging when you think you've gotten all that you can out of that institution, when you've maximized your opportunities. And if you can continue to learn and grow and maximize opportunities, that there isn't some sort of institutional barrier there, a cultural barrier there, then you're wonderful and you're happy. But when you've decided that there's something in place that's preventing you from growing at that job, then you want to look. Be it that to be fair to yourself as an artist and to be fair to the students that are in the group. So that's my gauge: is take as much out of it as you can, as long as you can. But when you get the sense that no more, then that's when you sincerely can justify looking.
I would 100% agree with everything that Tom said. That was kind of how I made the jump out of Bethel College. I felt like I needed a little bit more from what that was. As far as leveraging one tenure track position towards another, which I think was maybe at the crux of your question, I don't know that that really exists. Having gone through about 6 or 7 hires at the administrative level at Wichita State, having tenure at one place is important. So that would be my first answer. If you're on a track for tenure, try by all means to get it. And if you don't, that doesn't mean that things are over. It just means that having tenure makes some negotiation with that second job, getting tenure on your way in or getting geared towards tenure a lot more helpful. I have never looked at a resume or a CV and said, well, that person had tenure at this school, so we're for sure going to give. And every school that you're at is a little bit different. So when I'm looking down the pile yet again, and you're applying for jobs, I would keep exactly what Tom had said in mind. Like, if you want to apply for all the jobs on the planet, which I've done in a couple of years because I really needed a position, you're trying to cater your skills to the job description that you read. And so that committee, it's their job to make sure that they're bringing in candidates that actually meet all of their responsibilities or requirements for their jobs as well. So tenure doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a leg up for that next job if you don't have those qualifications. And I don't mean to sort of sidestep the question. It's really important. I've had people that have advanced for positions at WSU that didn't necessarily have tenure, but they were exactly what we were looking for. So I think that's really important. If you're on a tenure track job and you can get it, I think that helps. If not, that's okay too. Just make sure that you're gaining experience and you feel like you're growing as a musician and a professional. And I think it should be okay. I think that it'll work itself out.
Cool. And then we have one more question, and then unless you guys want to talk for hours and hours and hours, we'll probably wrap things up. But a cool question from our newly doctored trombone faculty, Dr. Kenneth Johnson. Yeah, right. We give him enough hard time as is. I think I've probably used that one enough. But Dr. Kenneth Johnson asks, is there a fundamentals portion of your conducting practice similar to that of euphonium, trombone, percussion player?
There is for me. I don't know that there is for everybody. I will often watch myself or record myself to make sure that what I think I'm communicating, I'm actually communicating. As we get older, less and less, unlike being a brass player, like I know I need to maintain or it's going bad. As a waver, once I've got some of my movements mapped, then I know I can go right to that tool, so I don't need to maintain it as much. So for younger conductors, though, I recommend that a lot. And I notice I said the word mapping. I think you have to map in your brain how some of this works first. I don't know enough. I'm not a neurologist, but I believe that that's a very real thing. So when you're younger, I tell my students, you need to conduct a lot. You just need to be conducting all the time. And it's hard to conduct silence, but it's just like playing scales, in my opinion. If you don't know your patterns really, really well, you don't have a concept of legato, staccato, marcato, accented, blah, 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 then it's not going to come out when it's time for you to use it in practice. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say 3 exercises or things that I try to stay aware of on a very regular basis. I didn't become happy with my conducting, let's put it that way, until I actually put some masking tape on the bathroom mirror of a y-axis and an x-axis to just kind of evaluate the consistency of what I do as for my default pattern, so that when I choose to be outside of that, but when Rome's burning, you want to have something to go back to, and I want to believe that my default pattern will be constant as often as possible. So that really helped me. So I don't do it right now as much, but yeah. Did I freeze? Sorry. Having the tape on the mirror was something I would do a lot. Likewise, sometimes I take a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper and tape it up on the mirror and use a pencil just like it's a baton and trace it on that mirror just to see what I look like. And then the third thing I would say in closing is totally opposite, but really important. I give myself a little drop the needle test with a metronome all the time. I'll just turn it on and just what tempo am I going at, and try to guess that. And so like in my conducting classes, I give that as an exam actually. And I tell the students, if you're within 8 clicks, it's a 2-point question. If you're within 8 clicks either way, so 16-point range, that's 1 point. And if you're within 4 clicks either way, an 8-point range, that's full credit. You get 2 points. And so I think it's imperative for conductors to just have not only you can't perfect pitch, but you can do perfect tick, by learning it. So right. I do that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day. I know that amongst the coronavirus and everything, you guys' plans for the fall probably change at the minute. So taking a full hour out of you guys' planning, it means a lot to us here at BIVA. We generally keep things pretty professional, but at the end of all these podcasts, we do something a little silly. And so by coming on, you've already agreed to do it. It was in the contract. So basically what we have to do is our very best mouth trumpet impression. And if you've caught any of these, everybody's done it. But I'm happy to give you an example if you need one. So it goes something like this. And feel free to do any kind of variation on that you'd like.
I was going to say, Keck is really good at this. Keck is really good at this. Yeah.
Okay, well then Tom, if you want to go first, feel free.
Well, I was going to say, remarkably, I'm probably off practice on it, but that's right. That was my default. Mine was just kind of a short little aperture thing, but I would always just go.
Excellent. A nice variation on other mouth trumpets that we've had. I got to say that was very impressive for a percussionist.
You can hold it on.
And Tim, what you got? Very good. Very good. Yes, that is the style that I prefer personally. I think it's very easy to accomplish, and I don't try to be risky. Otherwise, I embarrass myself more than I already have. So, well, again, I just want to say thank you both for coming on and giving everybody at the Brass Institutes of Virginia the opportunity to think about what it might be like being a conductor, kind of in in today's day and age, and hopefully we can continue having these discussions over the course of the calendar year, and I'm sure that it's going to change tomorrow what the modern conductor might look like. So thank you again, and thank you from all of us here at BIVA for checking out episode 7 as I looked up. So yes, so thank you all, and we will see you tomorrow. And tomorrow is with Dr. David Cutler, who is the professor of entrepreneurship at the University of South Carolina. And he'll be having a discussion on a video he recently posted called Classical Creativity in Music. So if you want to check it out, there'll be a post later on tonight. You can watch that video and come tomorrow armed with questions for him. All right. Thank you, everyone.
See you guys. Okay.
I think we are no longer.
Live stream. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, great.
That was fun. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like it's as much as going to classes and doing Zoom lessons and stuff this seems to go by much faster than any of those.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I get done with these and I'm just like, oh, okay, hour. All right, cool. Yeah, it's very quick. Whereas like in private lessons, I get to the 40-minute mark. I'm just like, I feel like I've been talking and just like trying to correct for 40 minutes straight. It's exhausting. These have been awesome. So,
yeah, I think this is going to be one of the things one of the positives that will come out of coronavirus. I think there's going to be a lot more Skyping back and forth and guest artists in all the teaching realms. And that's just great.
Yeah. As the technology gets better, which it kind of has to now,
Absolutely.
I think it's just going to be really easy for like in your guys' situation, just like being able to bring in composers and not have to worry about just internet connection and Skype being terrible and whatnot. But yeah, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day. Tom, it's really good to see you, man.
Yeah, it was great seeing you too. Absolutely. Best of luck, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hopefully there will be a gig.
There will be.
Right. But yeah, if we want to turn this into something where it's semi-regular and maybe, I mean, I don't know how Mr. Green does with the technology, but
he's doing it. And actually, I wanted to kind of see how this kind of went, because I could see us doing a lot more. I'd love to interview Travis. I'd love to interview Green, Scatterday. I mean, there's lots of people that just kind of coming at them with similar questions, like what we just answered, and just kind of letting them answer the questions and talking. So,
yeah, I thought this was great. And I'll let you guys know how we do the, we usually have somewhere between like 10 and like 15, 20 viewers live, but the amount of views that we get on this after the fact, because not everybody can be there at the time that it is, but
sure.
But we're turning these into, I talked to Tim about this, but Tom, we're going to turn these into, we're going to post edit them, put them all up. And we're actually thinking about, for the discussions, that it's a little more available to listen to as a podcast. Yeah. Like Derek's one on Studio One might be a little hard to,
because you can't see it
exactly to visualize. We'll probably still do it, but we're not really expecting a lot of people to listen to something like that. But for this, I think it'll be really great. And apparently, podcasting is super easy. So I hadn't done any research into it, but we're going to go through it. And Tim arranged this really cool intro that's going to be this like music intro and all the post stuff. It'll be great. So
yeah, cool.
So thanks again, guys, for coming on. Yeah, this was really fun, and I appreciate you guys coming. So
yeah, love it.
Yeah, well, good luck with the fall.
Yep.
Whatever that may look like. So.
All right. Yeah. Have a good one. We'll see y'all later.
Yeah. Yep. Take it easy, guys. A big thank you again to Tim Shade and Tom Keck for joining us today on Viva Broadcast to talk about the modern conductor and what that entails in today's world. If you would like your product or school to be featured on our broadcast, please reach out to me, Dakota Corbliss, Director of Operations at Dakota@fredbrass.com, and we'll be sure to set it up. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.